This experience happened to me in 2020. The world was shutting down because of COVID and everyone was cooped up in their homes. Being an avid backpacker and camper, I used COVID as an excuse to travel to different national parks and camp out in different places. One of those places was a creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Without giving away my identity or revealing too much personal information, let's just say something happened with my job back in 2019 that caused my reputation to kind of suffer a bit, and a good number of people despised me. I had to change apartments, get a new phone number, and eventually quit my job. The mistake I made caused a good number of people to lose a lot of money, so the shitstorm was expected. I just didn't know how far it would go. I was literally getting harassed by different random numbers for a while. Some texts were even threatening. I didn't know if they were from the same person or different people each time, but I considered the possibility that it was one person texting me from a bunch of different numbers. For a while it seemed to stop, and I was grateful that people seemed to lose interest or just move on. I wasn't working around this time. I was taking time to myself, hence another reason I was traveling around to different national parks. I drove the 3 hours to Rocky Mountain National Park, parked my truck, and started my hike up the trail to the creek. There was nobody else there. I'm sure that was because this was right when the lockdown started and people were taking it very seriously and not leaving their houses. That, and it was also still the winter time. There was a thin sheet of snow on the ground, hard enough that it made that loud crunching sound with every footstep. After a little while I made it to the creek, and it wasn't frozen, it was still flowing. It was incredibly peaceful, and this was a detox I needed from the stresses of my life at the time. I found a place a little ways off the path to set up camp. After the tent was set up, I chopped up some wood, started a fire, and cooked some sausages on the stove. Then I started reading my book by the fire. After finishing a few chapters, it was getting dark out. Thank God for headlamps. I rolled a J and started smoking it. After a few hits, I felt my phone start going off. Honestly, apart from my family, I don't have a lot of people texting me, so I pulled out my phone from my jacket pocket and saw a bunch of texts from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was happening again. The texts were from a number with a 203 area code, which I looked up to be Connecticut. Whoever it was texted me saying, "How's your camping going, buddy?" The second text said, "It's beautiful out here." The third text said, "I see why you came up here." My default reaction was to respond, "Who is this?" If they simply left it at "How's the camping going?" I would have assumed it was a family member, but they were sending messages as if they were here with me. The weed had already entered my system and I was definitely high. This did not help my anxiety one bit. I felt extremely paranoid and started looking around me, standing up and doing a complete 360, looking in every direction out to the increasingly darkening woods. I went to get my P365 handgun from my bag just to make me feel safer. Usually I'd put a fire out before calling it a night, but as paranoid as I was feeling now, the thought of being in total darkness freaked me out. I went into the tent and crawled onto my sleeping bag. I stared at my phone, at the texts, waiting for a response which didn't come. Minutes dragged on, and I just wanted the weed to wear off, honestly. I still had my headlamp on, so I tried to continue where I left off in my book, but between being high and my mind being stuck on those texts, I was kidding myself thinking I could read. I decided to just watch YouTube videos on my phone to pass the time. I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep just yet. I was watching some murder documentary on YouTube. I know, a pretty interesting choice considering the setting, and when I least expected it, I got another text. A response to my question before. They responded, "Doesn't matter anymore." My heart started racing all over again. I replied back, "How did you know I'm camping?" But once again, no response after this. The anxiety of this situation was weighing heavier and heavier on me. Was this a prank by a friend or family member? Or was this one of those people harassing me again? But if it was the latter, how would they know I'm camping? That's the really uncomfortable part. I managed to kill an hour just watching videos on my phone, and I noticed the glow from the fire outside was growing dimmer and dimmer as the fire died down to almost nothing. In the wintertime, without the sound of bugs, the woods are dead silent apart from wind on a windy night. The second a video would stop playing, the silence would become deafening. Usually I'd embrace the peace, but my peace was completely disturbed because of these texts. Something then broke the silence. The unmistakable sound of human footsteps in the snow. They approached my tent until they were only maybe 6 feet from outside the tent. Then the footsteps stopped. I had the gun tightly gripped in my hand, ready to turn the safety off. There was suddenly a flash from outside. It looked like someone briefly shined a flashlight at the tent, or they took a picture. I had my answer soon enough. I heard the person walk away now, before their footsteps slowly faded out to silence, and as I expected to happen in the back of my mind, my phone dinged and vibrated, and that number sent me a photo. The photo was of my tent. Following that was a text that said, "Have a good night's sleep." I can't explain it, but suddenly it felt like I completely snapped out of the remainder of my high, and a bout of adrenaline and confidence overwhelmed me. I unzipped the tent and shot 2 rounds into the air. The sound of footsteps running away in the snow in the not-so-far distance told me that it worked and scared the person off. But it also disturbed me even more, that would mean they were still hiding somewhere in the distance, watching. I screamed a threat into the air and climbed back inside my tent. I believe it worked because there were no more texts and no more sounds of footsteps. I was awake for hours after, simply because the occurrence completely woke me up. I felt like I drank 3 cups of coffee. Eventually, I did fall asleep, and waking up to morning sunlight was a huge relief. Whoever followed me there was not ready for me to pull a gun. I definitely don't seem the type of person that would own a gun, and I know that. That was my first time shooting that gun since buying it, and in fact my only time to this day. Whoever had been texting me, harassing me, and apparently stalking me, apparently decided to back off when they found out I had a gun, because almost 5 years later now, and I haven't been bothered. Still, it was a nightmarish night, and I can't imagine how differently it might have turned out if I wasn't armed. During my childhood, every year my family would have a tradition where we'd all go up to northern Michigan for a weekend in October. Our Uncle Jim used to own a 4-acre property up there. The house on the property could fit a lot of people, with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. 2 bedrooms were set up for my cousins and my siblings, so my brother and sister in one room and our 4 cousins in another room. The other rooms were for all of our parents. My Uncle Jim has always been a big hunter and fisherman. He'd go on camping trips specifically for hunting all around the country. My dad has gone camping with him a few times, even though he's an animal lover and would never harm a fly. Part of the 4 acres that my uncle owned was a big chunk of forest. He marked a line of trees with red paint to mark the property line. Beyond that was just forest owned by the county, I don't know. The nearest house in that direction was probably miles away. Me, my brother Adam, and my cousins Jake and Joe all came up with an idea at lunch when our dads were talking about hunting. We wanted to go camping in the woods that night. Our dads were on board with it. They were definitely already kind of drunk, so more likely to say yes to stuff. Our moms weren't as on board, but they didn't directly say no. So my dad and Uncle Jim took the 4 of us into the woods with a tent. My girl cousins and sister were not involved in this. It was just us boys. They led us into the woods, and when Joey, the youngest of us, started complaining that it's too far, they started laughing. That's how our dads are when they're together, especially when they drink. They loved messing with us as kids. Speaking of ages, I'm oldest. At the time, I was around 13. Adam and Jake were around 10, and Joe was around 9. We went beyond the property line, as there was this small clearing in the woods with a bunch of soft green, mossy-looking stuff that my uncle referred to as deer beds, I'm pretty sure. He said it was perfect for a campsite, and that he's used it before. My dad and Uncle Jim kind of gave us a half-drunk lesson on setting up a tent. They made us help out so that it wasn't just them doing all of the work. It was a really big tent, big enough for 4 people, especially kids. Once it was set up, we put our sleeping bags inside. We did this during the day because obviously it was infinitely easier than doing it at night. After all of that, we went back to the house and played games outside until dinner time. At dinner, our moms again expressed that they weren't fans of this idea, that we were too young to be out in the woods alone. Our dads insisted that we'd be fine, and I remember my dad making a joke that we'd be close enough for them to hear our screams if something were to go wrong. It wasn't until later on that our dads led us back into the woods to the tent. We all had flashlights and extra blankets since it was cold at night. I also brought a deck of Uno cards for us to play. When we all got situated in the tent, my dad and Uncle Jim left back to the house. We were suddenly alone in the woods. Honestly, we weren't as close to the house as you think. We were deep enough into the woods where you couldn't see any light from the house. We started playing Uno for a while. I'd say half an hour at least. Playing Uno is actually a really good time killer. It passes the time really well. The tent was lit up by our flashlights arranged in a circle. All was fun and swell, until we heard a scream in the distance. It sounded like a girl's scream. We all went silent and looked at one another with the same faces. I then remembered that foxes' screams sound like the scream of a woman, so I told everyone that. I saw how freaked out Joe was especially, but my statement calmed everyone down. We continued to play Uno. I actually won like every single round. At that point, no one had mentioned the scream again. It was most likely out of all of our minds. But it happened again, and much louder and closer this time. This time, it sounded a lot more human. We all went silent again. This time, even I was freaked out. Joe looked like he was going to cry. I told everyone to turn their flashlights off. We crawled to our respective sleeping bags and sat in the darkness. None of us had the courage to run out into the woods back to the house. It's that fear of running and being chased, and just catching the attention of whatever was out there with the sound of our footsteps. Somehow hiding inside of a cloth tent felt like the safer option, so we waited and waited in silence. We still whispered amongst each other, wondering if it could still be a fox. I was truthful and said, I don't know, hopefully. I don't know who heard it first, but we all sprung up and looked at one another again when we heard very fast footsteps crunching the leaves approaching the tent. Then they stopped, and there was an ear-piercing, gut-wrenching scream that sounded like a girl or woman's scream. It was right outside the tent, and the tent started shaking violently. All of us started screaming. Jake and Jim were screaming in fear, while my brother and I were screaming stuff like, "Get out of the tent." I unzipped the door to the tent, and one by one, we all ran into the woods with our flashlights on, the only reason we could see anything. That run back to the house was the most on-edge moment of my life, like a life or death kind of feeling. We made it to the property screaming the whole way, and our entire family was already outside in response to it. All four of us made it back safely. We explained the screams and the tent shaking. They were all shocked and horrified based on their reactions. Then I noticed our cousins Jamie and Christina and my sister weren't outside. I called out my dad and uncle, accusing them of sending one of the girls to scare us, but when he showed us that the girls were already in bed, that's when it was clear. Someone we didn't know was out in the woods. Our dads went out to the woods with a couple of rifles and returned after a while, having found nobody. The next day, we all helped in bringing the tent and other stuff back to the house. Obviously, you can guess that that was a one-and-done thing. We never camped out in those woods again. Hell, we didn't even play outside after dark anymore. What kid would after such an experience? My guess is as good as anybody's as to who was outside of our tent and why they were doing what they did. What I'm about to tell you still leaves me to question what is real and what's not. This happened to my dad and I, and even now, 2 years later, I get chills just thinking about it. I know how it sounds. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either, but I swear to you, every word is true. 2 years ago, my dad and I traveled to go camping at a spot out in the deep country. We enjoyed doing this, as it was often a very nice time to get away from real life. This place in particular was a nice spot. Hiking trails, zip lines, a bit touristy, but it has deep history. Native American lands, you know? First night there, it was perfect. Families at other campsites, campfires everywhere, kids laughing, the kind of peaceful night you go camping for. We cooked hot dogs, roasted marshmallows, cracked open a few beers, and made small talk with the people around us. A typical peaceful first night, but the second night is when things started to change. The staff told us we were the only ones in the park. Nobody else booked a site at first. We were psyched. A whole campground to ourselves, it sounded peaceful. We spent the day hiking, fishing, taking it slow. At one point, we listened to a scary podcast while sitting by the river, because, you know, why not lean into the spooky atmosphere? We thought we were being funny. By the time the sun started setting, we were feeling good. A little buzzed from the beers, tired in that satisfying way after a long day outdoors. We decided to head to the park's information center to charge our phones and grab some snacks before it got too dark. The walk back to our campsite, that's when the unease set in. The woods felt different. The air was heavier. The sky had this weird tint, like twilight didn't want to leave. My dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't this feel off, like we're in some kind of dream?" And he was right, it did. The forest felt endless, stretching out in every direction. My chest got tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We didn't say much after that, just kept walking, both of us glancing over our shoulders like we expected to see something lurking in the trees. Back at camp, we stayed close to the fire. We didn't really talk about the weird feeling. We didn't need to. It was like we both silently agreed to keep things normal, pretending nothing was wrong. We roasted marshmallows, played music, even smoked some weed to try and distract ourselves. Not the typical father-son moment you would expect, but by the time the sun dipped below the trees, we could no longer see what was in front of us, except for the fire. That's when the uneasy feeling had grown into something worse. As we sat by the campfire and roasted some s'mores, I want to say at about 9 o'clock, we heard a noise. It was a bang, as if a tree fell. It came out of nowhere, loud and close. It echoed through the woods from the direction of the river, maybe 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the sound, but there was nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, nothing. Bigfoot, we joked, nervous laughs slipping out, but neither of us believed it. A few minutes passed, then it came again, louder this time. Farther off, but the same sound. Same weight. We shined our lights again, but the forest swallowed our flashlights, allowing us to see only the trees surrounding our tent. And then the third bang, closer. That's when the fear hit. Whatever it was moving toward us, like it was circling the campsite. Then, not even before we were able to collect our thoughts, the fourth bang happens. About 20 yards away, maybe less. That's when the real fear and adrenaline set in. Whatever high I had going from the weed was now long gone. My dad turned to me with his eyes wide. I saw the fear in his face. We agreed to get in the tent. We quickly scrambled and threw the last of the firewood onto the fire, hoping the flames would scare off whatever was out there. Then we scrambled into the tent, leaving everything else behind. I ran inside of the tent and quickly dropped to the ground, lying flat. My dad, moving a little slower, following right behind me. As he was about to get into the tent is when the loudest bang happened. So close it felt like the ground shook. My dad froze, staring out into the dark. I said his name, grabbing his attention as he stared in shock, then quickly jumping into the tent. He muttered, "It's standing there." "What's standing there?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, his voice trembling. It was like a wall of darkness. He sat by the zipper as I buried myself under my sleeping bag, trying to move as quietly as I could. He sat there clutching the only weapon we had, a small knife. Useless really, but it was all we had. Then came this vibration noise that is still hard to explain to this day. It started low, like a hum, but it wasn't just sound. It filled the air. It was a feeling inside of us, making our chest tight. I've never felt anything like it. My dad whispered, "You hear that?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, too scared to make a sound, with the feeling as if we were being hunted. This went on for about 5 minutes as we sat in silence. And then, this other sound. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't human. It was this guttural, alien-like noise, as I like to put it. It honestly sounded like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. Nothing I have ever heard before. We stayed frozen in that tent, too scared to breathe, too scared to move. I had this small mesh window right by where I was laying, but I refused to look outside of it with the fear of being seen, just sitting there trying to control my breathing as my dad still sat there with the knife. And that's when the weirdest thing happened. In the middle of all of the chaos, we just blacked out. Neither of us remembered trying to fall asleep. My dad was still clutching the knife when we woke up, lying in the middle of the tent. I woke up on my back in a panic, as if something was standing over me. My first thought was to grab my phone to check the time, but it was dead. I asked my dad to check his. Dead too. Both had been fully charged the night before, making sure we had them working in case of an emergency. We stepped outside to pee. As we stood 5 feet from the tent and peed back to back, still scared out of our minds, we saw that it was still pitch black outside. The air was cold and still. The food we'd left on the table completely untouched. The fire we'd stoked before diving into the tent burned down to ash like it was never touched. The whole place felt wrong, like we shouldn't have been there. We waited the night out in the tent without saying much to each other, just trying to get some real sleep. We packed up in silence, not saying a word until we were in the car. When we finally talked about it, we realized we'd both felt the same thing that night, watched and hunted, like something was waiting for us to slip up. We told my mom when we got back. She thought we were crazy, said maybe we got drugged or inhaled some weird gas, but it wasn't that. Whatever happened that night, it was real. We both experienced the same thing. To this day, we don't know what it was. We didn't see it, not fully, but my dad came closest. Whatever he saw, it wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. We never heard any similar story like ours. We haven't been back to that camping site since, or even gone camping since. I don't think we ever will. Brace yourself for the literal terror I'm about to share with you. I don't even know if this is the place for a story like this, but I can't think of anywhere else to talk about it, and I just need to put it out there. I've told everyone under the sun about this. My family, my neighbors, my friends, random news outlets. It's never enough. I can't really explain it, but I feel some weird obligation to inform as many people as possible about what's been happening to me. So here goes. It's November of 2019 as I'm writing this. The story goes way back. I'm talking like 7 years plus. I can't tell you the exact year off the top of my head, but let's just say 2012. It might have been 2013, but that's my best guess. I was in my mid-20s with a stable job and girlfriend who's now my fiancée. I never went to college, so I had been in the workforce for a while, and it was unlikely that my life would ever experience any drastic change. Because of that, there was no reason for me to move far away from home, so I didn't. At that age, my girlfriend and I had just moved into my childhood home that my parents so graciously passed on to me as my first house. It's an extremely old brick house that my dad had actually inherited from his parents when he was around 40, so I'd be keeping it in the family. The house itself has seen a few rounds of renovations, but you can still tell it's old. It's the brick that gives it away. There are very few brick houses in our area, so it sticks out like a sore thumb. I kind of like that though, it feels special. Speaking of our area, we live in a very woodsy neighborhood, so the houses are spaced pretty far apart. Our house is also the last lot on our street, so instead of bordering the woods on just one side, we border it on two. The woods back there is massive, and I mean massive. As a kid, my brothers and I would often go exploring in there, but no amount of aimless wandering ever got us even close to charting the whole thing. I'm sure some people would find that intimidating, but I've always enjoyed the wilderness, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Plus, I'm a guy who likes keeping to myself, always have, so being isolated in my own little corner of the earth was appealing. Anyway, my girlfriend and I had been living there for a few months when all this started happening. It was sometime in the winter. I can't remember the exact month, all I know is that there was snow on the ground. It was sometime after 8 in the morning on a Sunday, the one day a week I got to sleep in. As I was getting in my pickup truck to treat myself to a coffee like I do every Sunday morning, I noticed something odd. In the driveway, right next to my car, there was what looked like a trail of footprints in the snow. My first thought was that my girlfriend had somehow woken up before me without me hearing her, and she came out to the driveway for whatever reason. But the more I looked around, the more I realized that was impossible. The path led across my front yard and through the hole in our side yard fence, meaning the footprints had originated from somewhere in the woods. On top of that, the trail didn't lead anywhere near our house, meaning they couldn't have been created by my girlfriend. I remember standing there, confused as hell. The trail didn't lead around our house or up to any of the windows, just the driver's side door of my car. That meant someone had walked directly from the woods to my car, only to immediately turn around and walk straight back into the woods. It was bizarre. I ended up asking my girlfriend about it later that day, but she obviously wasn't responsible for it. I wish I could give you more details about that first instance, but it was so long ago that that's about as much as I remember. It must have been at least 2 winters after that when the next thing happened. I specifically remember it being 2015, because that was the year my Seahawks lost the Super Bowl to Tom Brady. I woke up that morning and walked to my car. I think it was a weekday, but I'm not positive. As soon as I stepped outside, I instantly knew something was very, very wrong. There were footprints everywhere. I'm talking in the driveway, near all the windows, around the perimeter of the house. The yard was completely covered in them. I'm a pretty level-headed guy, so I'm not going to say I started panicking, but I'd be lying if I said I was completely calm in that moment. I was already late for work, so I didn't have time to inspect the prints very closely, but I didn't want to leave my girlfriend in a potentially dangerous situation. I quickly ran around the house and yard to make sure no one was lurking on the property, but that was about all I could do in the limited time I had. As I was pulling out of the driveway, I texted my girlfriend about the situation so she wouldn't freak out. I ended up leaving work early that day, mostly because the situation was stuck on my mind. By the time I got home, my girlfriend had made some shocking discoveries. As soon as I pulled up, she beckoned me into the yard and pointed at one of the trails, saying it had been bothering her all day. At first, I was confused, but then I realized what she was talking about. None of the footprints had left any shoe marks. I felt like an idiot for not picking up on it sooner. Whoever had left the footprints had been walking around in their bare feet. I was at a loss for words. Who the hell would walk around barefoot in freezing cold temperatures? My girlfriend suggested that maybe it was some kind of animal, but the prints genuinely looked like 2 human feet. We went inside and called my dad, but he said he'd never experienced anything like that in all of his years of living in that house. He told me to grab my rifle and try tracking down whoever had left the footprints. I really didn't want to, but I knew this kind of thing was my responsibility. My girlfriend wanted to call the police, but I knew that would be a waste of time. We had no evidence that a crime was committed, and I didn't think trespassing would warrant a search. I told her I'd call the police if I found something in the woods, and she agreed. Like I said before, that woods is its own world, so I told myself I'd turn back as soon as the sun started going down. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and headed out. I must have been following the trail for like 30 minutes when I noticed something really strange. Seemingly out of nowhere, the trail split into 2 diverging paths. I didn't know which one to follow. Hell, I didn't even know that was possible. I thought maybe whoever had left the trail had doubled back to confuse me, but then a scarier thought hit me. Was there more than one person out there? I was under the impression that I had been tracking one person this whole time. The possibility of multiple people had never even occurred to me. That was enough to shake me up, though. I wasn't fully comfortable knowing I could be outnumbered out there. I stood there a little while longer before deciding to turn around. It was getting dark anyway. As I was walking back, I couldn't help but think about those footprints. I felt like I would have noticed if 2 people were trying to walk in the same footprints. There's no way the person in the back could have done it without messing up at least once. And then I thought that maybe someone had walked backwards from deeper in the woods to make it look like there had been 2 people there the whole time. And then, obviously, there was the possibility that it was just one person who doubled back on himself. Maybe someone had been carrying another person on his back and just got tired. I really didn't know which explanation was the most disturbing. We did end up calling the police that night, but as I predicted, they told us there wasn't much they could do without definitive evidence of a crime. I told my girlfriend I was going into the woods again the next morning, but it snowed pretty heavily that night, so there were no prints to follow anymore. My girlfriend was obviously terrified, but there was literally nothing we could do. Luckily, that was the last thing that happened that winter. In fact, nothing happened for a few years after that. I would go as far as to say we had forgotten about the whole thing. A lot had happened since then. My girlfriend and I got engaged in that time frame, and we were focusing on other things. I wouldn't be writing this if the story ended there, though. What I'm about to tell you happened less than a year ago. It was just after the new year, so January of this year. One random morning, I woke up to footprints all over my property. Just like that, all the memories came flooding back. My fiancée actually broke down in our bedroom, asking me if we'd ever escaped this nightmare. I didn't know what to tell her. It was actually worse this time. There were footprints leading to my shed, and a bunch of tools were missing. God knows what else those people had done. I was furious. I called up my friend Theo, explained the situation, and asked him if he'd help me. He's a big wilderness guy, and a much more experienced hunter than I am, which is part of the reason I asked him for help. He agreed and drove over to my place a few hours later. My fiancée was worried sick, but but I promised her that Theo and I would be able to handle ourselves. We dressed for the cold and geared up, knowing we might be out there for hours. The reason I wasn't worried about the darkness this time around was because Theo had this really expensive thermal scope for his AR-10, which would allow us to see in low visibility. I never spent that much money on hunting equipment, so I'd still be blind, but it was definitely comforting knowing at least one of us would be able to see. I won't sugarcoat it, I was pretty scared by the time we headed out. At first, Theo and I talked as we walked, but after 45 minutes, we were mostly silent. It's like the seriousness of the situation hit us both at the same time. I remember praying to God that I hadn't dragged Theo into some horrible situation. I'm not sure how long we walked after that, but eventually, the tracks once again split into two sets of footprints. We followed the one on the left for a few minutes, but at one point, the trail just stopped abruptly. We retraced our steps back to the split, and Theo made a comment about whoever left the tracks really didn't want to be followed. I didn't want to think about it, so we just kept following the footprints in silence. I'm not kidding you. There were at least 3 other dead ends that forced us to retrace our steps, wasting valuable daylight. I remember thinking how remarkable it was that someone could walk backwards so perfectly that a trail of footprints didn't look like it had been stepped on multiple times. I'm telling you, it wasn't normal. The one upside, which Theo pointed out to me, was the dead ends likely meant we were tracking just one person. Eventually, it started getting dark. We were really deep in the woods at that point. I didn't recognize my surroundings at all. The trail of footprints didn't diverge for a long time after that. Theo said whoever we were tracking had probably given up trying to make dead ends. Another 5 minutes or so passed, and the footprints started getting noticeably deeper. We were getting closer. At one point, another set of footprints appeared right alongside the original. Theo cursed and whispered that he had been wrong, and that we were probably tracking 2 people. The sun was basically all the way down now, so Theo was checking his scope every so often. The snow gave me some visibility, but I'll be honest, I probably would have turned around had it not been for Theo's scope. We were walking in complete silence. Out of nowhere, I felt Theo's arm reach against my chest, motioning me to stop. I looked at him, and he was looking straight ahead through his scope. I couldn't see what he was looking at, so I just kept looking at him. It looked like he was holding his breath. I had never seen him so still. After a good 20 seconds, he slowly made his way over to the nearest tree and crouched down. I followed suit, not even questioning why. He looked through his scope again, and I could see his hand begin to tremble slightly. Another 20 seconds of complete silence. I was dying of suspense, so I lightly tapped his shoulder. He lowered his rifle and silently handed it to me. I looked through the scope and had to fight back a scream. There were 4 figures huddled in the snow. At first I thought they were bears, but I quickly realized they weren't. They were human beings. 2 of them were large and hunched over, and the other 2 were smaller. The smaller ones were clinging to a nearby tree, wildly jerking their heads around. They were eating something. I couldn't make out faces or details. Thermal scopes don't give you that, but I could see enough to know they were naked. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen with my own 2 eyes. Eventually, the larger ones picked up the smaller ones from off the tree and placed them on their shoulders. They then began walking deeper into the woods. Theo and I sat under that tree for what felt like an hour. We didn't dare move until we were positive that there was no way those things could hear us. By the time we got back to the house, hours later, I was surprised to find my fiancée was still awake. She told me she couldn't sleep knowing I was out there and asked what we found. I told her in as minimal detail as possible, but she was still horrified. We called the police that night, who told us they'd search the woods the first thing the next morning. Theo agreed to stay the night so the 2 of us could assist the police in their search. The next morning, the police searched the woods with our help, but called it off after a few hours due to the partly covered up footprints. My fiancé demanded that they keep searching, but they said they couldn't sanction a huge search over some missing tools. I don't blame them, but it didn't feel like closure. Theo and I knew what we saw. Winter is fast approaching, and both my fiancé and I are worried those people are going to come back again. We're seriously considering moving, but haven't been able to get the ball rolling on that. I don't really know what to think. Like I said earlier, I've told everyone I can about what's been happening to us. It's literally been going on for years. None of my neighbors have ever experienced anything like this, which doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why my house is getting targeted or what those people even want. Some of my friends think they're harmless, but other people tell me I'm in grave danger. I think I'm gonna try and seal off my yard from the woods, but I don't know what else to do besides that. Hopefully we can move out soon. Last summer, I decided to tackle a major section of the Pacific Crest Trail. I've always loved hiking, especially solo trips. My plan was simple: park my car at the end of the section, hitch a ride to the trailhead, and hike back over the course of a little more than a week and a half. It sounded straightforward enough at the time. The first few days went smoothly, about how I expected. The trail was everything I'd hoped it would be: endless stretches of towering trees and winding paths cutting through serene landscapes. I'm in pretty good shape, so I don't have to stop very frequently when I'm hiking. I'm obviously not going to hike in the dark though, so every night I had to pitch a tent to get some shut-eye. I've always preferred to keep a low profile, especially since solo hikers can attract attention. Because of that, I'd venture a little off the trail to set up my camp each night. I figured it was better that way, minimize the chance of a stranger stumbling across my campsite. Up until the third night, everything was perfectly fine, but what I'm about to tell you is the reason why I'm taking an extended break from hiking or any kind of wilderness exploration for that matter. I woke up in the middle of the night with this odd sense that something was wrong. It was the kind of gut feeling you can't explain, but you know better than to ignore. I looked around my tent. Everything seemed normal inside, so I decided to have a look around the campsite. I drew my rifle, grabbed a flashlight, and unzipped the tent. There was no one out there, no one that I could see at least. I returned to my tent and started checking my pack. That's when I realized my wallet was gone. At first, I thought I'd just misplaced it, maybe left it outside the tent or buried it somewhere in my gear. But after tearing through everything, it was clear someone had taken it. My personal information, cash, credit cards, all of it. How is that even possible, though? Had someone broken into my tent just to steal that one thing and leave? It was unlikely, but randomly misplacing it was very uncharacteristic of me. I came to terms with the unfortunate conclusion that I had probably lost it myself. Things only got worse from there, though. Over the course of the next few days, I started to notice more things missing. Small items, seemingly random things. One of my lighters, my Swiss Army knife, a few energy bars. I knew I wasn't just misplacing everything. Someone was stealing my belongings. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but by the fourth day, it was undeniable. I was being stalked. There wasn't any cell coverage on that part of the trail, so it wasn't like I could alert someone about my situation. I remember contemplating turning back, but I'd only be saving myself a couple of days at best. There was no way I'd be able to hike either direction without sleeping, but I didn't feel comfortable pitching a tent in those woods with someone literally stalking me. It was a lose-lose situation. I remained calm and told myself there was a reason I had brought my rifle out there. And then it dawned on me, why hadn't that person stolen my gun? It's almost as if they were deliberately messing with me. That night, I tied my tent shut from the inside, hoping that would keep them out should they return. I tried to stay up for as long as possible, but I eventually fell asleep from pure exhaustion. My plan worked though, because when I woke up the next morning, there was no sign that anyone had been in my tent. By then, the paranoia had set in fully though. The solitude was getting to my brain, and every second of hiking was agonizing. I don't have anxiety, nor have I ever had it, but let me tell you, I've never felt worse in my life than I did over the next few days. Just imagine being in my position. No options but to continue hiking despite knowing someone's lurking not far behind. The anxiety was perpetual, and I was unraveling. I can't explain why or how, but my mind started playing tricks on me. A rustling in the bushes turned out to be nothing. A shadow flickering at the edge of my vision vanished the moment I turned my head. The hallucinations got worse. I can't remember most of them specifically, but the one that sticks out the most is this. As I was walking, I felt myself step into an ankle-deep puddle of water that almost caused me to trip. I literally heard the splash and felt the cold water soaking my sock, but when I looked down, the ground was completely dry. I stood there in complete shock. It felt so real. I had no choice but to continue down the trail. As bad as the days were, the nights were always worse. I tied my tent shut and slept next to my rifle, but nothing made the anxiety go away. At one point, I had to splash cold water on my face to calm myself down. The hallucinations mostly subsided after that. I'm not sure what I would have done if they had continued. The next night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps walking around my campsite. I quietly grabbed my rifle, preparing to confront whoever was there, but my body was frozen in fear. Eventually, the footsteps faded into the woods, but there was no way in hell I was going to sleep after that. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up camp in a frenzy, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie my gear. I couldn't stay out there another night. I was so close, probably a day and a quarter's hike away from my car, maybe less if I moved quickly. I decided that I wouldn't be stopping to sleep that night, that I'd push through the night to get off the godforsaken trail as quickly as possible. I hiked for hours, as quickly as my body would let me go. When the sun started to set, I gritted my teeth and continued instead of pulling off to pitch my tent. By the time it was pitch black out, I was so close. Probably 2 hours away at most. I kept walking, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. I started second-guessing my decision. I had never hiked in the darkness before, and I was not prepared for how difficult it was. That in and of itself was scary enough. I kept going, trying to keep my breathing steady. About an hour passed. I was getting closer. And then, I heard it. Somewhere behind me, I was sure I heard footsteps. I spun around and flashed my light, and to my horror, I saw something slink behind a tree. The adrenaline took over, and I aimed my rifle at the tree. I demanded that they come out in a loud voice. The figure stepped forward. It was definitely a human, but when I tell you it was the most barbaric-looking thing I'd ever seen, I'm not exaggerating. Words cannot describe what I was looking at. He was wearing nothing but a pair of my shorts, which I hadn't even realized were missing. His skin was scratched up in several different places, and his face was covered in hair. He started walking towards me, even though I had my rifle aimed at him. Before I could think, I tapped off a warning round next to him. He jumped at the sound and instantly retreated, sprinting back into the woods. I was in shock. Without wasting another second, I turned around and went as fast as I could. By the time I made it out of the woods, I locked my car doors and called the police. When they finally showed up, they told me that I shouldn't stick around. I didn't need to be told twice. I was out of there that night. The craziest part of the whole thing, in my opinion, was the hallucinations. I didn't think such vivid hallucinations were even possible. It's going to be a long time before I go hiking again, and I can confidently say that when I do, I won't be alone. I would advise anyone planning on hiking the Pacific Crest Trail to be extremely cautious and carry a firearm. This experience is something I still think about often. I apologize in advance if I mess up any details about the story I'm about to tell. This is something that my best friend told me multiple times several years ago now. It's one of those stories so unsettling you can't shake it even after hearing it more than once. My friend's dad was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of cutting down giant trees and slicing them to specific lengths. His job meant long, grueling hours, often alone in the deep, secluded forests of the Pacific Northwest. The way his logging crew worked, he was paid based on the number of trees he cut down rather than the hours he worked, so he would often push himself to work 16 to 20-hour days to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his coworker finished their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the felled trees and transport them to the mill. While he spent about half of his time working alone, the other half was spent with his friend Griffin, another tree saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when they worked on opposite ends of the same job site. A number of years ago, my friend's dad and Griffin were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 3 weeks just to clear a road wide enough for their trucks and equipment to make it to the site. By the time they began work, they were positioned in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They were already 10 days in, making good progress, when they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. At first, the voices were muffled, just faint, static-laden murmurs that didn't make sense. They tried switching channels, but no matter what they did, the chatter followed them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for anyone to follow you when you're switching channels. As they progressed farther up the mountain, the voices became more distinct. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could hear, they both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments felt off. My friend's dad said it sounded almost casual at times, but the content was unintelligible. They also started finding strange signs that people had been there before them. Random containers, footprints in the dirt, and small makeshift campsites. Like I said before, they were in a place so remote it was practically inaccessible, so these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been up there. One day, Griffin came across a tent hidden just off a trail and called my friend's dad over. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and crude sketches of children being molested. There were even photos of a fresh apple indicating whoever owned it had been there recently. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave immediately. My friend's dad, ever the workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night, they sat in the camper, unable to shake the dread that hung over them. The radio crackled to life again, and this time, they could make out snippets of a conversation between two men. They were talking about mundane things, collecting water and firewood, but the realization that these men were likely connected to the tent freaked my friend's dad out. Griffin wasn't as fazed, but my friend's dad was losing it. The next night, my friend's dad decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering bush for a fire, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unnerving than the chatter. Griffin was upset that my friend's dad had announced their presence, and the two of them got into a brief argument before deciding they'd escalate the situation the next day. Around midnight, Griffin shook my friend's dad awake, whispering that someone was outside the camper. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Heart pounding, he fumbled for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded. He had no idea where his ammunition was. Griffin was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was laughable given their location. They both sat frozen as they heard the camper door handle jiggle. The door creaked open, but didn't fully swing inward. Their camper was high off the ground, and there was no ladder or stool to climb up. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scratches along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, my friend's dad nodded at Griffin, signaling he was going to check it out. He moved quietly toward the door, gripping a flashlight in his shaking hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open, and he was struck across the face with a knife. His pain was blinding. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin, without hesitation, leapt out of the camper and tackled the man with a knife. The second man bolted into the darkness, and the one Griffin had tackled scrambled to his feet and followed. They disappeared into the forest. Griffin helped my dad's friend back into the truck, and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. It was bad. His face was a bloody mess, and there was a cut across his eye so severe it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their coworkers was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's dad struggles with PTSD. His right eye, with its disfigured pupil, constantly reminds him of that night. I'm sure he hasn't had a full night of restful sleep since. I've been terrified of deep woods for a long time now, mostly because of my friend's dad's experience. I haven't heard from my friend or his dad in years now, so I can only hope he's doing all right. This is one of those stories I've been sitting on for a really long time. It happened back when I was maybe 25 or 26, way before I met my wife and way before we had kids. I was a completely different person back then. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that I had the kind of free time and risk tolerance that I genuinely can't relate to anymore. I used to do these solo backpacking trips a few times a year, usually somewhere in the Appalachians. I'd drive out to some remote trailhead, hike deep into the backcountry, way off the trail, and spend a few days completely off the grid. No cell service, no other people, nothing. I loved it. My friends thought I was insane, and honestly, I kind of was. This particular trip was in the Cherokee National Forest, and it changed how I see backpacking forever. I had been out there for 2 days, and everything had been going perfectly. The weather had been great, the trail was quiet, and I hadn't seen another person since the first morning. That changed pretty quickly, though. On the afternoon of the second day, I noticed dark storm clouds building up to the west. I wasn't too worried at first. I'd hiked through rain plenty of times, and it was never a big deal. But within about an hour, I realized it wasn't going to be a passing shower. The wind picked up hard, and the temperature dropped fast enough that I actually stopped to put on another layer. By the time the rain started, I was already looking for a spot to hunker down. The problem was that I was in a pretty exposed section of the trail. As I predicted, it wasn't a light rain. It went from windy to full-on downpour in minutes. The wind was bending smaller trees sideways, and I could hear branches cracking and falling in the canopy above me. I started getting genuinely concerned about my safety. Lightning was striking pretty close by, and I was hiking at elevation with a metal-framed pack on my back. Not ideal. I kept pushing forward, completely soaked at that point. I was scanning the woods on either side of the trail for anything that could pass as shelter. As if by some miracle, I actually saw a structure through the trees off to my left. It was small and dark and partially hidden by the forest, but it was unmistakably man-made. As I got closer, I realized it was a tiny, one-story cabin. They looked extremely old, like it could have been a hunting cabin or a homesteader's shelter from decades ago. There was a single window on the side I was approaching. I can't overstate how relieved I was. I practically sprinted over to the thing and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dim but dry. There wasn't much in there, just a chair, a small table, and what looked like a cot frame pushed against the far wall. There was a stone fireplace on the right side that was clogged with old ash and debris. The place honestly smelled really bad, but I didn't care about anything other than stripping out of my soaked clothes and laying down. There wasn't a couch or anything in there, so I literally just picked a spot on the floor and lied down. I was in survival mode at that point, not exploration mode. All I cared about was that I was out of the storm. It wasn't until I'd been inside for maybe 10 or 15 minutes that I started actually looking around. With the storm raging outside, there wasn't much else to do besides flick on a flashlight and snoop, so that's exactly what I did. There was more stuff in that cabin than I had initially realized. For starters, there was a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner near the cot frame. It didn't look ancient like the rest of the place, which confused me. There were also a couple of cans and water jugs on the table, which made me think someone had been using the place as a base camp of sorts. Maybe another backpacker or a hunter. It wasn't unusual to find stuff like that in remote cabins, but the more I looked around, the more things started bothering me. There were marks on the wall near the door. At first I thought they were just damage from age or weather, but when I got closer to inspect them, I could see they were scratches. There were dozens of them, some shallow and some deeper. There was no pattern or order to the marks, at least not one I could see. I stepped back and looked at the door itself. The handle was a simple latch, which wasn't unusual. Despite the storm, I opened the door just to get a look at the mechanism. There was a metal bracket on the outside of the frame, which looked like it was designed to hold a padlock. The bracket was on the outside. There was no corresponding latch on the inside. That meant the door could only be locked from the outside. Things only got stranger. I shut the door and started looking around the cabin. The only thing I hadn't checked out yet was the window, so I walked over to it. The glass was still perfectly intact, which surprised me given the apparent age of the place. But then I noticed why. There were screws drilled into the window frame, one in each corner securing it shut. Those had also been driven in from outside, and around the edges of the frame on the inside, there were more scratches, deep ones. These were unmistakable. They honestly looked like someone had tried to pry the window open with their bare hands. All of it hit me at once. Someone had been kept in this cabin, trapped, as in kept against their will. I should have left right then, and I did consider that, but there was a good part of me that felt like whatever had gone on in that cabin was well in the past. Everything in the cabin looked really old. Even the sleeping bag, which did look on the newer side, admittedly, was rigid and dusty. Plus, the last thing I wanted to do was go back out in that storm again, so I stayed. I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe an hour, maybe more. The storm wasn't letting up at all. If anything, it had gotten worse. The rain on the roof was so loud that it was hard to hear much of anything else. That's probably why it took me so long to notice the other sound. I picked up on the scratching or scraping noises from outside, somewhere along the left wall of the cabin. At first, I thought it was a branch, but I couldn't remember if there had been branches low enough to even touch the exterior of the cabin. As I was thinking about it, I heard 2 heavy thumps on the porch. They honestly didn't sound like storm sounds. This time I stood up. I did that thing where you freeze in place and try to focus by staring at a random spot on the wall. I was trying to listen, but if someone was moving out there, it would have been impossible to hear over the storm. I started getting paranoid that those sounds I heard were just a few of many, and that the rest had been drowned out by the rain. My eyes drifted over to the window. I couldn't bring myself to look through it. If someone really was out there, they'd probably be looking through it. I stayed in that position for what felt like forever. After a while, I started to relax a bit, thinking I had just been hearing the storm, or at the very worst, an animal poking around the cabin. I was almost ready to forget about everything, when I heard something that sent me over the edge. Pressure on the door, like someone was leaning their full weight against it from the other side. The wood creaked and the latch rattled once before the pressure released. My heart rate instantly shot back up, and that's when something clicked. Why would someone be outside in a storm like this, circling the cabin, tapping on the walls, without just coming in? The door wasn't locked, nothing was stopping them, and then I thought about what I'd found inside the cabin, and it occurred to me that maybe whoever was out there didn't want to come inside. Maybe they wanted me to stay inside. Maybe the whole point was to keep me in there. I don't know if that was the right conclusion or if my mind was just spiraling, but I decided I was leaving right then. I didn't care about the storm. I started moving things into my backpack as fast as I could. I had the sickening feeling that something really bad was about to happen, and I was right. The next few moments were a blur. I was maybe 30 seconds from walking out the door when I heard the sound of glass shattering behind me. I spun around just in time to see something come through the window, and that was all I could see before the whole room erupted in flames. The flames spread so fast that I couldn't even process what was happening. One second I was standing in a dark room, and the next second the walls were on fire. The heat hit me like a physical wall, and the door wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the outside. I slammed into it with all my might, and it gave. It collapsed off its hinges, and me with it. I scrambled to get back on my feet, and I just ran. I couldn't even see. I was just running wildly through the woods and rain, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cabin. But before I could get a safe distance away, I felt something tackle me from behind, and I was back on the ground. There was a person on top of me, and suddenly I was fighting for my life. I clawed and kicked and screamed, but this guy wouldn't get off me. He was yelling too, and he kept trying to get me in a chokehold. He was gouging at my eyes and pulling my hair, and I started to feel dizzy, but I managed to push him off. I got back up and kept running, and whoever had just tried to kill me was screaming like a maniac. I looked back twice. I couldn't see my attacker, but I did see the cabin, which was fully engulfed in flames. I think the picture of that fireball is burned into my brain forever. The second time I looked back, the glow was smaller but still visible through the woods, but I just kept running. For all I knew, I was being chased. I didn't stop until my legs gave out. I found a spot where a couple of large trees had fallen against each other, and there was a narrow gap underneath that blocked most of the rain. I crawled under there and just collapsed. I couldn't feel my body. I don't know if it was the fire, the rain, or the attack. Maybe all three, but I was completely numb. All I did was sit in that crouched position and try to keep breathing. I don't know how many hours passed under those trees, but time lost all meaning. Eventually, I felt some feelings start to re-enter my body, and I told myself it was move or die. Whoever was out there was probably looking for me, and he couldn't have been that far away. So I got up and started moving through the woods. I didn't know where the trail was, but I didn't really care. I honestly can't tell you how I survived that night, but I did. I stumbled onto a random trail and just followed it. I was soaked and probably bleeding from multiple places, but I just kept trudging on. Eventually, the rain subsided a bit, at least enough for me to figure out where I was. I made it to some random trailhead. By that point, the storm had passed. I don't remember too much after that. All I remember is that the first person I saw drove me to a hospital. I had second-degree burns on my left forearm and the back of my neck, and doctors told me I was lucky I hadn't inhaled more smoke than I did. None of it was permanent, but it hurt like hell for a long time afterwards. By the time I was healed and safe at home, I told myself I would never camp or hike alone again. Someone had intentionally set that cabin on fire to kill me. That's the only thing that makes any sense. It was pouring rain, a full-blown thunderstorm, and the roof was metal. There's no way a wooden structure goes up like that fast unless the wood had been treated with something beforehand. I gave the police everything, or as much as I could, but I could tell they weren't really going to do anything. And to be fair, I wasn't in a charted part of the woods, so it would have been silly to hound them. The only thing I don't understand is the timing of everything. My wife would probably tell you I stopped doing solo trips because I grew up and got more responsible, and she's not entirely wrong, but I honestly never told her about this incident. And I know I'll never go backcountry trekking again alone. My name is James. This happened maybe 7 or 8 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s and still doing stuff that I probably shouldn't have been doing. I had this friend Charles, who was kind of notorious in our friend group for finding cool places to explore, like abandoned buildings and old factories. If it was somewhere you weren't supposed to be, Charles had probably already been there and can tell you exactly how to get in. He spent a weird amount of time on Google Earth and these niche urbex forums, and he'd always be hitting the group chat with screenshots of random places he wanted to check out. Most of us would entertain his ideas, but never actually follow through. I was usually the exception. Charles and I had been friends since high school, and I think the reason we got along so well was that we had similar thresholds for risk. While most of our friends would hear his pitches and go, "That sounds insane," I'd hear them and go, "When are we going?" It was a dynamic that led to some great memories and a few situations that I look back on now and genuinely wonder how we made it out unscathed. This story is about one of those situations. One weekend, Charles texted me about a fire lookout tower he'd found deep in some forest not far away from us. I really wish I could remember the name of the forest, but I can't. Charles said it had been decommissioned years ago and was just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, completely untouched. He didn't tell me how he'd found it, but I didn't want to know. He was convinced we could hike out to it, climb it, and spend the night up there. I was more skeptical. I mean, things like that are usually fenced off or at least protected somehow, but I promised him I'd at least come and check it out. To be fair, the idea of being 70 feet or so up in the middle of a forest with a 360-degree view sounded incredible to me. We picked a random weekend and made it happen. Charles planned the entire thing out, including the drive, what to pack, and how to find the tower once we were in the woods. It was a 3-hour drive away, and Charles told me the hike would be off the trail but pretty short, about 4 miles or so. We drove out early in the morning on Friday and made it into the woods sometime in the afternoon. For some reason, I was kind of expecting us to get lost, or at the very least not find the tower, which is exactly why I was all the more astonished when we actually did. Seeing it through the trees for the first time was an insane sight. I remember blurting out "no fucking way" when I saw how tall it was. I was even more astonished when we got to the base of it and realized it was completely unprotected or fenced off. It was just sitting there in the middle of the woods waiting for us to find it. The cab at the top was this small square room with windows on all 4 sides. There was a metal staircase that zigzagged up the frame with a section of vertical ladder for the final stretch up to the cab. The whole thing looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Some of the lower railings were bent or missing, and there was graffiti on the support beams near the base. To be completely honest, it did not look like the type of structure anyone would be eager to climb, but Charles was practically giddy. While I was hesitating and debating whether I should try convincing him to back out, he had already started climbing. I yelled at him to be careful, and that got him to slow down. I figured what the hell, and told myself to stop bitching. The two of us made our way up carefully, checking the stairs as we went. Most of them felt solid enough, but there were a few spots where the bolts had rusted through and the steps wobbled. The vertical ladder section near the top was the sketchiest part. It was 20-something feet of straight climbing with nothing but a narrow metal cage around it. The adrenaline rush was insane, but that's what Charles lived for. He made it up without any issues. The view from the cab was unreal. You could see for miles in every direction. We had also timed it perfectly. The sun was maybe an hour from setting. Our plan was to camp out for the night and catch the sunrise. There was a decently wide wraparound walkway up there, which is where we decided to chill, at least initially. We cracked a few beers and just enjoyed the view and some conversation. The sun eventually went down, and the sky went from orange to purple to dark blue in a matter of minutes. Once the light was gone, the forest below us was just a black mass in every direction. There wasn't a single light in sight. The stars were incredible, easily the best I've ever seen. But being alone out there in the dark was freaking me out a little. It was just weird not being able to see anything, despite knowing there was a whole forest below us. Charles could tell I was getting a little antsy, and he started messing with me, grabbing my shoulder and stuff like that. But the thing that pissed me off the most was when he smacked his metal water bottle against the side of the tower. It sent this incredibly loud, echoing clang in every direction, probably to be heard for miles. The sound was so loud and ominous that I actually got mad at him. I told him I wanted to go inside the cab, and he finally got the hint. There wasn't much in there, by the way. It had clearly been hollowed out ages ago. He said he was going to finish his beer before coming in and joining me, and I was fine with that. I picked a random corner and started setting my sleeping stuff up. But before I could finish, he told me in a very quiet, serious voice to come back outside. Very un-Charles-like. So I did. I walked back around to where he was sitting and saw that he was pointing diagonally downwards, toward the forest below us. At first I thought he was just messing with me again, but it only took me a few seconds to realize what he was pointing at. There was a light down there. It was faint and pretty far away, but it was definitely down there, and it was genuinely horrifying. It was weaving through the forest at what seemed like walking pace, and my first thought was that it was a person who'd heard the clang from the tower. I don't know why I felt the urge to whisper, but I did. I told him he was stupid for doing that, and we were probably moments away from getting caught or arrested or something. He looked at me with this confused expression before saying, "You think that's a person?" Now it was my turn to be confused. What the hell was he talking about? I asked him what else it could be, and he said that light was moving way too evenly. He wasn't exactly wrong. The light wasn't swinging or wobbling the way you'd expect someone carrying a lantern or flashlight to be. But then again, it was probably too far away to tell. I didn't say anything after that. Neither did Charles. He just kept staring at this mysterious light as it continued weaving through the forest. Part of me thought it was just some random hiker that had nothing to do with us, but I knew that was wishful thinking. After a few minutes, it was obvious that the light was getting closer. It was also much clearer that the light was moving perfectly, like it was floating or hovering. Charles asked me what we should do, and I didn't have an answer for him. There wasn't really anything we could do. Like, what were we gonna do, climb down? As we were throwing out more theories, the light suddenly zipped forward, like it skipped a beat. It was really thick, but for a split second that light went from steady, even movement to an abrupt zip forward. Then it was back to steady movement again. I started feeling my palms start to sweat, and I could tell Charles was really freaked out too. I kept trying to convince myself that whoever was down there was just wandering aimlessly through the woods, but again, wishful thinking. They were definitely heading for the tower, and after about 10 minutes, they reached it. At that point, the light was directly below us, and I was bracing myself for someone to yell up to us and announce themselves as police. But no, the light just stopped moving and stayed in that exact spot right below us. From our vantage point straight above, we could see the light itself, but not whoever was holding it. Charles and I stared at it for a while. The suspense was killing me, but it must have been killing Charles even more, because he again did something I wanted to throw him off the tower for. This guy actually yelled, "Hey, are you good?" down at the light, revealing our presence. I looked at him in horror. I genuinely couldn't believe he would do something so stupid. We didn't get a response though, and the light didn't even move. We waited a little bit, and then Charles yelled down again, but still nothing. So there we were, 70 feet up in an abandoned fire tower in the middle of nowhere, with someone or something blocking our only exit. We were completely trapped. We must have watched that light for 30 minutes straight, whispering to each other every so often. It never moved once. I wasn't worried about being secretive anymore. Charles had burned that bridge a long time ago, So I did something I should have done a while ago. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it straight down at the base of the tower. But even after I did that, I still couldn't see the source of the light. Eventually, we accepted that there was nothing we could do and tried to go back to what we were doing. We went back to talking, but I made sure I never took my eyes off that light for more than a few seconds. Charles thought it was some kind of LED that someone had placed there to mess with us, but who the hell would bother doing that? At some point, Charles said he was going to climb down and check it out, and I told him that was insane. Not only was that inviting trouble, but it was downright stupid and dangerous. As we were arguing about it, I glanced down and realized that I couldn't see the light anymore. There was just darkness and more darkness down there again. I frantically scanned the emptiness below us with my eyes, looking for the light, but it wasn't there anymore. Charles seemed relieved, but I was the opposite. He kept telling me to relax, saying whoever had been there had probably left, but I was more freaked out than I had been when the light was just sitting there motionlessly. The thought that someone could be down there, and now we couldn't even see them, was terrifying to me. Charles reassured me that we'd obviously be able to hear if anyone tried to climb the ladder, which I guessed was true, but I was still really unsettled. Suddenly, I didn't want to be in the open air anymore. I suggested that we wait out the rest of the night from inside the cab, and he agreed. So we went inside and set up our sleeping bags. Neither of us were going to sleep though. That was suicide. Staying awake turned out to be the right decision, because not 20 minutes after going inside, we started hearing noises. The first ones were all metallic clangs that echoed up through the steel frame of the tower. They weren't footsteps, which I want to be crystal clear about, because I was listening specifically for footsteps, and this was not that. It sounded more like someone struck one of the support beams with a wrench or a crowbar. A few minutes later, another one came. This one was more of a grinding sound, like metal being twisted against metal, and it lasted for a good few seconds before stopping. Charles and I kept looking at each other like we were expecting the other one to do something, but there was nothing we could do. The sounds kept coming from what sounded like different spots, which was what really got me because it meant whatever was causing them was moving down there. The sounds continued on and off for a while. I kept trying to map out the sounds in my head, figure out where they were coming from, how many sources there were, whether they were getting closer or staying at the same level. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Charles and I were whispering to each other about what we'd do if we started hearing someone walking up. I was sitting against the far wall of the cab, facing the windows on the opposite side. Charles was on the opposite side, looking over my shoulder. There were so many windows in there that we didn't feel safe and wanted to be able to see out of all of them. There wasn't much to see though. They were all pretty dark, with the only light being from the stars and the moon. But then, I saw something. A dark outline moved across the glass. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing fast enough, but then it passed in front of the next pane over, and that's what did it. I couldn't help but yell, and Charles scrambled away from the window. The two of us immediately ran over to the door and pressed our backs against it. If someone tried to come through that door, they were going to have to push through both of us. I kept looking for the figure through the windows, but I couldn't see anything. That was impossible though. Unless they were crawling on all fours, I should have been able to see them. Charles and I sat up like that for a really long time, and I could hear him hyperventilating. What followed was the most tense and terrifying few hours of my life. Charles and I sat there in that exact position like our lives depended on it. By the time the sun started coming up, I was completely exhausted. When it was finally light enough to see, I counted to 3 and then swung the door open violently, expecting someone to be crouching behind it, but there was no one there. Charles and I ran around the side of it to confirm that, and it was clear. I looked down to the base of the tower, and there was nothing down there either. We grabbed our stuff and started descending as fast as we could. We made it about 3/4 of the way down the staircase before Charles stopped in front of me. He just stood on the landing, staring down at the next section of stairs. I looked past him and saw it immediately. An entire section of the staircase was gone. It wasn't just a few steps. I'm talking about an entire section of stairs, straight up missing. It was impossible, but we were staring at it. Someone had deconstructed an entire section of staircase during the night while we were sitting directly above them. That must have been what those sounds were, but that didn't make sense. The noises didn't stop until after I had seen the person up there. So had they really crossed that gap twice? In the dark? No way. Plus, there's absolutely no chance someone could have done that without us hearing it. That would have been a lot louder than a few clangs here and there. We stood on that landing for a while, trying to figure out what to do. We had to just jump across. It wasn't that far, but it was still scary. Charles ended up twisting his ankle, but I was fine. We made it the rest of the way down, and that was that. There was no one waiting for us at the bottom. There was actually nothing there at all, including the metal steps that had been removed, at least as far as we could tell. Granted, we didn't look around too much. It didn't make any sense, but we weren't sticking around. I still don't have an explanation for any of it. Not the light, not the sounds, not the figure I saw outside the window, and definitely not how someone managed to remove an entire section of steel staircase in the middle of the night without us hearing it. Every time I see Charles, this is something we still talk about. I go camping alone a few times a year. I've been doing it since I was in my 20s, and at this point I'm in my late 30s, so close to 15 years of solo trips at this point. I know the risks, which is why I carry a rifle. This happened about 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. It's a massive stretch of forest, over 700,000 acres, and if you know where to go, you can hike for days without seeing another person. I had a rough stretch of work and my head wasn't in a great place, and I felt like I just needed a few days away from everything. I drove out on a Thursday morning. I parked at a trailhead off a Forest Service road and started hiking. The plan was simple: 3 nights in the backcountry. That was pretty much it. I had my tent, my pack, enough food and water for 4 days, and my .308 bolt action that I always bring on solo trips. The first day was exactly what I needed. I covered about 7 miles before finding a flat spot near a creek bed that looked like a good place to camp. I set up my tent, gathered some wood, and had a fire going by the time the sun started going down. I cooked some food, drank a beer, and sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. The whole time, I didn't see a single person. I fell asleep around 10. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what woke me. It was more like my brain just switched on for no reason, the way it does sometimes when you're sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. I lay there for a minute and stared at the ceiling of my tent, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something. There was a faint orangey glow coming through the walls of my tent. I unzipped the tent flap and looked out. Maybe 200 yards away, through the trees, there was a fire. Not a big one, it was about the size of a campfire, but it was definitely there. It was flickering, which is how I knew it was a fire. I watched it for a few minutes, waiting to hear talking or something. I wanted to confirm it wasn't some random forest fire, but after a while of looking at it, I couldn't see or hear anything beyond the fire. I watched it a little while longer just to see if it would grow out of control, but it didn't. I figured it was another camper set up nearby that I just hadn't noticed during the day. It wasn't impossible, especially since I had gone to sleep relatively early. I figured whoever it was had gone to sleep and left their fire going, which is irresponsible but not uncommon. I watched it for about 5 more minutes, and then zipped my tent back up and went to sleep. It didn't bother me too much. When I woke up the next morning, the fire was the first thing I thought about. Not because it had scared me, but because I was curious. I wanted to see who else was out there, maybe say hi, but mostly to satisfy my curiosity. I packed up my campsite and hiked in the direction where the fire had been. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the area. I was pretty confident I had the right spot. There was a natural clearing that lined up with the angle I'd been looking from. But when I got there, I stopped. There was no fire pit, nor was there a ring of stones or a pile of ash or scorched ground, charred wood, nothing. The ground was completely undisturbed. I walked the whole clearing, checking for any sign that someone had been there, but there was no signs of life whatsoever. The area was pristine. I stood there for a while, genuinely confused. I was certain I'd seen a fire. It had been a campfire burning clearly for at least 5 minutes while I watched it, and yet the ground where it should have been looked like no one had set foot there in months. I considered the possibility that I had the wrong spot, but there wasn't another clearing anywhere near the right distance or direction. There wasn't much I could do beyond that though, so I just moved on. I still had 2 more nights planned, and I wasn't about to cut my trip short over something silly like that. I hiked for most of the day. The terrain changed as I moved deeper into the forest. The creek bed fell away behind me and the ground started climbing. By mid-afternoon, I was in a denser, older section of the forest where the trees were taller and the canopy was thick enough to block out most of the sky. It was quieter in there, which was nice. I found a good campsite around 4. That evening was uneventful. I doused my fire a little after 9 and turned in for the night. I don't know what time it was when the sound woke me up, but it was loud enough to pull me out of a dead sleep. I woke up to this distant, enormous cracking sound, like a thick branch being snapped in half, except it kept going. It was violent, and it lasted for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. At the tail end of it, there was a deep, resonant thud that I could quite literally feel in the ground beneath me. I instantly knew what it was. A tree had fallen somewhere deeper in the woods, or at the very least, a very large branch. If you've ever heard the sound of a tree falling before, which I do understand is kind of a rare occurrence, it's amazing and terrifying at the same time. It didn't scare me per se, but the deafening force and scale of it gave me this crazy adrenaline rush. I lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to figure out what had just caused it. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It wasn't storming, and there was barely any wind. There was nothing I could think of that would have brought a tree down on a night like this, but there was also nothing I could do. I couldn't fall asleep at that point either. My heart was still racing, and the adrenaline had me awake, so I just kind of closed my eyes and waited for it to wear off. But then, not 10 minutes later, it happened again. Only this time, it was much louder. That same gruesome crackling sound, followed by a crash of branches and a deafening thud. But this one was close. Not right on top of me, but close enough that the sound was almost disorienting, and it came from a completely different direction than the first one. The first tree had fallen somewhere to the south, and the second one was to my northwest. I sat up immediately. Now I was actually scared. 2 trees falling on the same night in 2 different parts of the forest with no wind and no storm. That was inconceivable. I kept trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. The most logical thought was that the first one had caused some kind of chain reaction, but that hypothesis didn't account for the fact that the trees fell in completely different parts of the forest. Whatever brought down the first tree had nothing to do with the second one. They were 2 different events. But that was even more inconceivable. I was sitting there processing all of this when I heard something new. Something that took my fear from a medium 5 to a resounding 10. It was this low and continuous rumbling sound that I can only describe as a cross between a groan and a growl, like a person clearing their throat, except it didn't stop. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. I've heard bears, I've heard elk, I've heard bobcats. This wasn't any of those. It sounded like something was making the noise on purpose, and it went on for what felt like a full minute without any break or variation. I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around as quietly as I could, and aimed it at the tent flap. At that point, I was full on panicking. I must have sat like that for 20 minutes. The sound eventually tapered off. It didn't stop abruptly, it kind of faded out, like whatever was making it had moved further away. And just like that, the forest was quiet again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't think I would have been able to if I tried. It was the worst night of my life. As soon as I saw daylight, I got out of the tent. I packed up as quickly as possible, still spooked and extremely unsettled despite being able to see. Once everything was in my pack, I started walking in the direction of the second tree, the louder and closer one. I needed to see it, if only to confirm that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I had my rifle ready in my hands, so I found the tree after about 10 minutes. The thing was massive, and its trunk was lying at an angle across a shallow slope. Broken branches and debris were scattered all around it, so it was real. I really couldn't believe it. I'd been trying to convince myself I had just imagined everything from the night before, but there it was. I needed to keep investigating. I wouldn't have been satisfied leaving without knowing what had caused the fall. I walked over the stump, which was about 3 feet high. The wood where it had broken was pale and fresh, but the break wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind of jagged, splintered fracture you get from wind stress or root failure. The wood around the break point had been torn apart in a way that I had never seen before. Parts of the stump looked like they'd been gouged. I really don't know how else to describe it. There were long, irregular grooves running through the wood at different angles, and it looked like some of them were up to an inch deep, at least. The wood genuinely looked like it had been stripped and chewed rather than cut or snapped. The more I looked, the more I noticed. Some of the bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath had that same gouged, chewed-up look. I can't pretend I knew what I was looking at, because I didn't. I'd seen beaver damage before, and this was not that. Beavers leave clean cuts. I'd seen woodpecker damage, and this wasn't that either. This was aggressive, messy, and covered way too much surface area to be any animal I could think of. The tree hadn't fallen because it was dead or because the wind knocked it over. Something had worked on that trunk until it came down, and suddenly I felt this really nasty feeling in my gut. I needed to leave. I stopped examining the tree and started backing away, but as I was turning to leave, something near one of the tree branches caught my eye. There was a small cluster of items sitting on the ground. If it weren't for the fact that they looked man-made, I wouldn't have even bothered checking them out. As soon as I saw what they were, I lost my shit. It was a blue bandana and a carabiner, and they were both my items. I instantly started digging through my pack and confirmed those two items were missing. In that moment, I grabbed my stuff, shoved it in my backpack, and ran. I didn't know if running was the right decision, if that would have attracted attention to me, but I did anyway. I just needed to get out of those woods. I got tired after a while under the weight of all my stuff, but I moved as fast as I could. The hike back took me most of the day, and the entire time I felt like I was being stalked or watched. I felt like something was going to jump out from somewhere any second. I kept my rifle in my hands the entire time. I made it back to my car around 3 in the afternoon. I drove out of there so fast, despite my exhaustion. The first thing I did when I got to a safe distance away was call the police. I don't think they took me very seriously, but I didn't care. I also knew there probably wasn't much they could do, but I didn't care about that either. I was pretty messed up for days afterward. None of it made any sense whatsoever. What I couldn't get over was the fact that my stuff had been rummaged through. Something had either stalked me through the woods, or knew where I was the entire time. That unexplainable fire from the first night must have had something to do with it. There's no way that was a coincidence. And those trees, I still have no explanation for what could have cut them down. I genuinely don't think it was anything human, but as for what animal it could have been, I have no idea. I still go camping, believe it or not, but this is something that I think will hang over me forever. A few years ago, I moved to a small rural community. I grew up in a fairly large city and was never one for that kind of life. It was loud and chaotic all the time. As soon as I was old enough and could afford it on my own, I moved away. The town I moved to is very small. The surrounding forests and mountains are beautiful, no matter what season of the year it is. It almost blows my mind that this little town isn't more of a tourist trap in the summer and fall. The quiet little town doesn't have much. A few restaurants, a couple bars, a gas station which also does repairs, one supermarket, a small police station, and that's basically it. Even the closest Walmart is like an hour away. My little paradise of a town is really off the grid, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I've been living in this town for over 3 years now, and other than one horrible day, it's been great. But even peaceful towns can sometimes have dark secrets. When I first moved to town, I got a part-time job at the local supermarket. I used to manage one of the grocery store chains in my hometown, so I had a lot of experience. I would go in first thing in the morning and unload the trucks and stock the shelves of the small store. The owner offered a management position, but I turned him down. I only wanted to work part-time, basically so I could have a little extra spending money and an excuse to get out of the house. I have a part-time job that I do online as well, and that's the bulk of my income. I wanted as much free time as I could possibly afford so I could hike and fish as much as possible. There's so many woodlands in this area that it would take me a lifetime to hike them all. Of course, I'm up for the challenge. So every day off, rain or shine, I would find a new area to hike, and I would head into the woods for the entire day. It didn't take me long to start this new lifestyle. Almost immediately after moving into town, I started hitting the trails and trying to meet the locals. At night, I would grab a bite to eat in town, and I learned quickly that everyone in the area was unexpectedly pleasant. Everyone except one. I'm referring to a man named Hector. I should say that Hector wasn't mean or rude. He was just strange, like on another planet strange. The first time I met Hector, I was just arriving at work a little after 5 in the morning, and he ran up to my car window as I was getting out of the car. Where I'm from, if someone does this, you punch them in the face before they can hit you. But not here. I put my hands up in a defensive position and started yelling at him. He screamed in my face and skipped away. Legitimately skipped. As I was standing there, confused out of my mind, one of my coworkers came up to me and told me that his name is Hector, and he's harmless. Apparently, he's lived in or near town for a long time, but nobody knows exactly where he lives. Everyone assumes he's homeless and probably lives under a bridge somewhere. They just leave him alone and let him wander around because he isn't hurting anybody. It was alarming for him to scream in my face, but if everyone in town claimed he was harmless, then I just went along with it. For the next few weeks, I would see Hector everywhere. It didn't matter if I was going to work at the crack of dawn or leaving the bar after 11. I would see him just wandering the streets. He was a short guy, but strong looking. He was built like an ox. He couldn't have been taller than 5'3" at most. He was always wearing the stained white tank top and wore royal blue pants. I couldn't tell if they were jeans or sweatpants. He had a long, dirty gray beard, and his hair was in a ponytail, even though he was bald on the top of his head. And even with this strange appearance, the most notable thing about Hector was the skipping. Every time you'd see him moving, he'd skip. His blissful ignorance was almost envious sometimes. One morning when I was driving to work, I saw Hector standing on the corner facing the opposite direction of my car. As I was approaching the intersection, I saw him waving to someone. When I passed the intersection, I could see now that he wasn't waving to anyone. He started talking to someone and looked very animated, even though nobody was there. I just continued driving and minding my business. Honestly, it's not that weird for someone in Hector's position to talk to themselves, especially if they're not a danger to themselves or others. I couldn't care less what he was doing. That next weekend, I hit the woods on my day off. I spent a few hours hiking a part of the forest I hadn't been to yet. While I was deep in the forest, I thought I could hear the sound of a voice echoing through the trees. Hearing any kind of voice this deep in the woods is alarming. Remember, this isn't like a trail you'd find at a park or something. This is just pure wilderness, so any voice would cause you to feel a little unnerved. I know it's sketchy, but I wanted to know the source of the voice. Instead of retreating back into the woods and away from the voices, I started to move toward the voices slowly. As I got closer to the voices, I could tell that one of them sounded like it was in distress. I grabbed my pocket knife just in case and continued to sneak as quietly as I could. The voices were just behind the thick grouping of trees that was directly in front of me. When I peeked from behind the trees, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't multiple voices. It was Hector. Just Hector. He was talking to himself and changing his voice. One of the voices was angry and belittling, calling him a coward, among some other not very nice things. Then, like the snap of a finger, the angry voice started to weep. He was begging for forgiveness. One of the most terrifying things is that each voice sounded completely different. I decided to stay hidden behind the tree. I wasn't about to engage with him. While I was hiding behind the tree, the angry voice came back, and without even looking, he screamed, "He's hiding behind the tree. This time you can't let him get away." I watched Hector get up and looked directly at me through the trees. For the first time since I had met Hector, I could see genuine rage in his eyes. I took a step back from the trees, trying to process what was happening. I didn't have long because right at that moment, Hector charged at me, screaming. He wasn't skipping anymore, he was sprinting, and he was much faster than I thought he would be. I continued running back toward the direction of where I had started the hike. For a while, I could hear Hector right on my tail. He kept screaming that I was not going to get out of the forest alive. He would laugh and then scream. Every few minutes, it sounded like he was right behind me, about to grab me, but he never did. Eventually, I didn't hear anything. I finally made it back to where I started, and I instantly ducked down and looked all around the woods. Hector was nowhere to be found. I got to town and went to the local police station and told them all about Hector. The sheriff almost didn't believe me. She couldn't imagine Hector acting with such anger and rage. I told her roughly the area of the woods I was in, and she looked like she turned white as a ghost. She couldn't believe Hector was out there for starters. This was several hours worth of hiking into the woods, but she told me that isn't even the most disturbing part. Right around the area in the woods I was describing, she told me they found the remains of one of the local men from town years ago. She told me that it was disturbing and saddening for the entire community. They never found out who did it, and it's one of the only dark blemishes on an otherwise peaceful town. She started to wonder if maybe Hector had something to do with the horrible crime. She was trying to remember exactly when Hector started appearing in the town. She said her memory was fuzzy, but she was pretty sure that Hector started showing up in town around the time they found the remains. She asked if I could take her to the exact location because she wanted to bring Hector in for questioning. At the very least, she wanted to know why he attacked me and if it was safe for him to still be wandering around. We basically ran to the area in the woods, but Hector was gone. Our sheriff, who was now retired, started to get emotional because this was almost the exact same spot they found the remains all those years ago. They never caught Hector. Nobody in town ever saw him again. It's like he just vanished in the woods that day. I still go out and hike every chance I get, and every time I go, I still expect Hector to jump out of the trees and continue chasing me. I always have my knife on me just in case. Sometimes, even the most harmless-looking people can cause the most damage. I have no idea if Hector was responsible for that horrible crime, but after how I saw him acting in the woods, it wouldn't surprise me. I remember asking why Hector wasn't questioned when they found the remains, and nobody could really give me a solid answer. Now that I've lived here for a few years, I assume it's because these people just aren't equipped to deal with crimes of that magnitude. I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming there wasn't a lengthy investigation. After writing and reliving this, I still can't believe this happened. It still feels surreal to me. My advice to anyone who hears this is to always pay attention, because you never know what evil could be on the inside of someone, even someone as harmless and seemingly happy as Hector appeared to be. I'm writing this story while it's still fresh in my head. My girlfriend Katie and I just got back from what was supposed to be a multiple-day hiking trip. The reason I'm writing this down is that I'm not exactly sure what happened to us. The more I think about it, the more I start to spiral down a rabbit hole of insane thoughts. 3 days ago, we started this long, planned-out hike in the mountains of upstate New York. If anyone's familiar with that area, they'll know just how beautiful it is. When people outside of New York State think about New York, they tend to only think about the city, but there's so much more to this state. I would argue that the nature here in New York is vastly underrated. Our planned trip was supposed to last 4 days and 3 nights, a chance to get off the grid and just be alone with each other and nature. We love to hike and be outdoors. We've hiked forests and mountains all over the country, so this trip wasn't anything out of the ordinary. The first day went smoothly. Other than some patches of rain, we didn't have any other issues. We set up a tent, ate some food, and turned in for bed so we could get an early start on our hike tomorrow morning. During the night, I woke up and noticed that Katie was sitting up. She looked scared, which is out of character for her. I asked her if she was okay, and she sort of tripped over her words at first. Eventually, she got the words out. She told me that she heard something outside the tent, something that freaked her out. Initially, I thought it could have been an animal like a deer because they're everywhere up here, but that wouldn't have caused her to be as freaked out as she was. I told her I'd take a look, and as I reached for the zipper inside the tent, she gasped and grabbed my hand. She begged me not to open it. I still had my hand on the zipper, looking at Katie, trying to figure out what could have scared her this much. My thought at the time was that she might have had a bad dream and was still in that half-dream state. While I was contemplating what to do next, I watched Katie freeze. This time, I heard it as well. Outside the tent, I swear I could hear someone walking around. We both sat quietly and listened to the footsteps walking around outside. The way the footsteps sounded, it was clearly not an animal. Whoever was outside just kept walking around the tent. Every couple of minutes, the person would giggle. She had a high-pitched laugh. Neither one of us had any idea what to do. It may have been stupid, but we decided our best course of action was just to stay put until dawn and hope that whoever was outside the tent was gone. I'm not sure exactly how long she was outside the tent, but eventually, the sound of her walking around stopped. For a few hours, we heard nothing except the quiet forest. Usually, this sound is our favorite thing in the world, but on that night, the quiet forest had us on edge. At dawn, I slowly left the tent. Thankfully, we were alone. I felt relief for about 5 seconds. As soon as I fully left the tent, I noticed that there were strange rocks all over our little campsite. Rocks I know were not there the night before. These rocks were also stacked and arranged strangely. Katie was ready to pack up and go home, but the idiot that I am convinced her to keep going ahead with our planned hike. The events of the previous night were horrible, but I was confident that it had to be someone messing with us. I couldn't come up with any other rational explanation. The entire day, Katie kept looking over her shoulder. She was convinced we were being followed. Every time I would stop and look around, I wouldn't see anything. We only hiked for half the day. Katie was all done, and I didn't blame her. We set up our campsite and got ready for the evening. Katie begged me to head back tomorrow. If we left at dawn and basically jogged, we could most likely cover all the ground from the last day and a half. The whole point of these hikes is to enjoy them, and she was not enjoying herself. That night, I was sure she wasn't going to be able to sleep. I was wrong. She must have been exhausted. She passed out as soon as her head hit the pillow. It took me a while, but I finally started to get sleepy. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I could hear someone whisper. It jolted me awake. I looked next to me in the tent to see if Katie was awake. I thought that maybe she whispered something to me, but she was still out like a light. Then I heard the whisper again. It was a soft female voice, and she said, "Come outside, Artie." I couldn't believe I just heard my name. Then a different woman's voice said, "Yeah, Artie, please come outside, we're waiting." I didn't react. I didn't do anything except sit completely still. Katie was still asleep, and I didn't know if I should wake her up and cause a panic, or just ignore this like the previous night. They didn't whisper anymore, but I could hear them running around the tent. It wasn't like the previous night when they were walking. They were for sure running now. To make things worse, while they were running, they started to laugh uncontrollably. These high-pitched laughs were the worst thing I've ever heard. It was like they were cackling. During the laughing, one of the voices got much deeper and louder, and she shouted, "Come outside now." With the loud voices and all the activity outside the tent, Katie was now awake. She instantly panicked and wanted to know what was going on. I can't imagine how disoriented she must have been waking up to screaming and laughing outside the tent. I didn't even have a few seconds to explain to her what was going on, because these women outside started messing with the tent, almost like they kept leaning into the sides of it. Then they would try pulling the tent, and somehow they'd actually move us a little bit. During all this chaos, the women outside continued to laugh. I have to admit, I had no idea what to do. This was way beyond anything I'd ever dealt with. I was scared, and I could tell Katie was horrified. Then, in an instant, we heard several footsteps running away. I could hear the footsteps running further into the woods. It was quiet again. For 30 minutes, Katie and I just stared at each other. We didn't say one word. Neither one of us had any idea what just happened, or how to deal with it. After the 30 minutes had passed with no other sounds, I decided I was going to unzip the tent a little bit and just see if we were alone. I slowly unzipped the tent while Katie squeezed the life out of my arm. Standing about 20 feet from the tent was an image that will be burned into my head for my entire life. It was a young woman who looked like she was in her 20s. She was staring right at me, smiling, almost like she was waiting for me to unzip the tent. She had a white dress on, which is crazy because we were in the woods in the middle of the night. She waved at me. I zipped the tent up, sat there speechless. Katie looked over my shoulder when I had the tent unzipped, and she saw the woman as well. Her reaction was the same as mine. For the rest of the night, we sat and held each other. At any moment, we expected that woman to charge the tent. However, nothing happened. At dawn, I slowly unzipped the tent again. She wasn't there anymore. Just like the previous morning, there were rocks scattered all across the camp in strange formations. There were also sticks tied together that made weird symbols. Symbols I didn't recognize, and neither did Kate. Trust me, I know how this sounds, and I can't believe it either. It sounds like something out of a nightmare. We packed up our stuff, made sure to leave all the rocks and sticks there, and we darted out of those woods. We nearly sprinted instead of jogging. It took less than a day for us to make it back to our car. We drove back to our apartment practically in silence. I told her that as soon as I get home, I'm writing the story and sharing it. As much as we love the woods, I'm in no hurry to go back, especially not those woods. I guess the logical answer still is that someone was just messing with us. I don't know why anyone would go through that much effort for a joke. It seems insane. Any other conclusion I come to makes me question everything I know. This felt sinister. I mean, how the hell did she know my name? I hope we can move past this. It makes me think maybe monsters really do exist. I thought about sharing this story several times throughout the years. I've been sitting on it for a while. I don't talk about it a lot. I guess the main reason I don't like talking about it is that I struggle to fully explain what happened. Every year since we graduated high school, my friends Theo and Carlos, along with me, would spend a weekend in the woods. Something we still do today, even though we're all married now. It's a tradition we started. No matter where life takes us, we always get together at least once and spend quality time together. When we were kids, we loved exploring. We'd trek the woods in town where we grew up. One thing we were obsessed with was caves. We found a cave while we were walking through the woods when we were 16. As we got older, we would go further out into the woods searching for caves. That was our thing. Over the years, I think we've only found 3 or 4 caves. As we got older, our trips were more for friendship than exploring. Our little expeditions were safe, and the biggest risk we would have was just wildlife, which, even after all these years, was never an issue for us. One day, while we were together on one of our trips, we stumbled across a cabin that was legitimately in the middle of the woods. We approached the cabin just like every fool in every horror movie that features a rundown cabin in the woods. We were even joking among ourselves that we were in a horror movie cliche. We looked through the windows, and clearly this place was abandoned. It was almost empty inside except for a few pieces of furniture that were destroyed. Carlos wanted to go inside the cabin and check it out, and we didn't disagree. Going inside the cabin may seem like a hell no moment for some, but honestly, it's not that weird. We've seen some crazy things in the woods over the years. For example, one time we found this huge clearing in the woods that had a creepy makeshift village. It had all these small huts, and it was filled with giant mounds of debris and trash everywhere. It was scary at first. We found out after that it was once living quarters for residents of a traveling circus that was in the area for a while, way back in the day. So needless to say, there is weird stuff in the woods. A clearly abandoned cabin is far from something that would send me running. It's just more unexpected than anything else. We loved it when we would find something weird like this. Getting to the bottom of whatever we found was something we all looked forward to. As we walked inside the cabin, I had already started to ask myself questions. First, why was there a cabin so far out in the woods? I should mention that it's a stretch to refer to this as a cabin. It was like a large shed just built with wood. I feel like it's just easier to call it a cabin. The whole building was one room. There was no plumbing, no electricity, and no roads that led to or from it. It felt like the air was dry in there, almost hard to breathe. Carlos started to pick through some of the pieces of the broken furniture to see if anything was salvageable, but it wasn't. There wasn't much to investigate in there, since it was just a big square. While we were standing there talking, we kept hearing a weird sound we couldn't identify right away, which was weird given how small the cabin was. It sounded like something dragging in the dirt, not a typical noise you hear in a cabin or any other house. The sound was coming from underneath us. The cabin didn't have a basement, at least not one we could see, so hearing this noise was strange. I even put my ear to the floor so I could listen, and while I was down there, it was unmistakably a noise coming from under the floor. I got up and started kicking the broken furniture around, looking for a latch or a small door in the floorboards. In the far left corner of the cabin, underneath some dust and debris, was a rusted handle on the ground. I had to open it and see what was under this cabin. I lifted the door, and the odor coming from the dark underneath the cabin almost made me throw up. It just reminded me of rotten meat. I grabbed a bandana from my backpack and wrapped it around my nose. It didn't fix the issue, but it made it slightly more manageable. Before descending the ladder, I tried looking around to see if I could see what was making the noise. It was too dark to see anything, but the noise was louder, and I could say with 100% certainty that the noise was for sure coming from down there. As I went down the ladder, the first thing I noticed was how unnaturally cold it was down there. It was like that cold feeling of being in a basement, but way worse. I used my flashlight and looked around the dark room. The ground was stones, and the only other thing I could see was 2 giant structural beams on each side of the room. Carlos and Theo asked if I saw what was making the noise, and before I told them no, I got a different answer. Limping from behind one of the structural beams was a normal-looking guy. He had a green t-shirt with a pair of jeans. He was clean-shaven with dark hair that was on the messy side. As soon as he limped past the beam, I yelped. It startled me so bad that I couldn't even scream properly. But the man didn't acknowledge me at all. He he just kept limping from the left side of the room to the right side. He was dragging his right foot on the ground. That was the sound we heard before finding the dark room. The man didn't seem well, even though he wasn't that old. Not only was he limping and dragging his foot, but he was also breathing heavily. I shouted to the man, asking if he was okay. I could hear Carlos yelling at me to shut up and leave him alone. Theo came halfway down the ladder, saw the man limping, and went right back up. I don't blame him. After I shouted a few times, asking if he was okay, he still didn't even acknowledge my existence. I moved a little closer to him, and I noticed that he was mumbling something under his breath. Whatever he was saying, it was clearly not English, although I'm not a linguistics expert. I was a few feet away from the man, and he stopped limping and stood completely still. He turned just his head to look at me. Then he turned the rest of his body. After that, he didn't move. He wasn't mumbling anymore, and he wasn't breathing heavy either. I started to slowly back away and head back toward the ladder. The entire time, he didn't move a muscle. I grabbed the ladder, and when I did, the man took a step toward me, just one single step, and then he stopped again. Everything about this was terrible. I climbed up the ladder as fast as I could. I told Carlos and Theo we needed to leave. Whoever was down there was not well, and I was pretty sure he could have been dangerous. We looked down the ladder one last time, and standing at the base of the ladder, staring directly up at us, was the man. He wasn't moving, but he did have one hand on the ladder like he was thinking about climbing up. I'll never forget those horrible, lifeless eyes staring directly at us. We all ran out of the cabin. We just kept running. I remember thinking maybe this guy was in trouble and we just left him, but that thought didn't really last long. I can't articulate and explain why this felt wrong, but it just did. We got out of the woods and decided to report the cabin and the man to the local authorities, just in case he was in some kind of trouble. From what I was told, they did investigate the cabin, but they didn't find anybody down in the dark room, or any evidence that would suggest somebody living in that cabin. They even looked at missing person reports to see if anybody was potentially missing, but nobody matched this man's description. Even the police couldn't fully explain why this cabin was all the way out in the woods. I have no idea what we stumbled across that afternoon. It seems like a mistake. Maybe we're the bad guys for breaking into that guy's cabin, although I don't think that's accurate. As much as I would love to know what that man's true intentions were, I'm happy we made it out in time to not find out if they were bad. My gut tells me we came across something evil, but my brain tells me that can't be true. We still get together every year to hike, but we're even more careful now. I promise you this, if we ever stumble across another cabin in the middle of the woods, I'm gonna run as fast as I can in the opposite direction, so I never experience anything like this again.
Number 4. This happened during a Boy Scout campout when I was 15. My friend, who was supposed to share the tent with me, called out from the trip at the last minute, so that meant I had to pitch the tent and sleep in it alone. The sun was going down, and after a long day of hiking, we got back to camp to set up our tents. It was already dark at that point, and I was still trying to set it up. It wasn't as easy doing it yourself. Someone came over and finally helped me, and then we ate dinner. After the cliched telling of scary stories around the campfire, we all went to sleep. I guess I was a little happy that I had my own tent at that point, since I had more room. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody stomping around my tent. I immediately assumed it was another scout going to take a leak or something. You may be thinking that all our tents were pitched right next to each other, but our scoutmasters actually had us pitch our tents far apart, so I was pretty far from my closest scoutmates. The stomping around the tent seemed to just be going around in a circle, so at that point, I was sure somebody was messing with me. I asked who it was, and in response to that, they stomped off into the woods. I almost found myself going out and following them, but I figured it wasn't worth it, and just tried to fall back asleep. But after that, it was hard to. Sure enough, the stomping came back, and started circling the tent again. I was pissed off now, so I got up and unzipped the door to the tent. I was expecting to see another scout, but when I confronted the person making the noise, instead I saw a grown man, probably 6'5", in his mid-30s. My heart was racing and I couldn't even gather up the courage to scream. The man gave me a creepy smile, and then brought his finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I did a quick 180 and sprinted to my scoutmaster's tent, screaming like a baby. He ran out before I even reached the tent, and I told him about the man I saw. He and the other scoutmaster ran over to my tent with one of the hunting rifles, but they didn't find the man. They did, however, pick up on the tracks the man left walking around the tent. We were all told to bring our tents closer together, like literally right on top of each other. The trip was cut short the next day and we all went home. I have never gone camping since, and I never will again. Number 3. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds, while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite, but we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. Number 2. After college, I went backpacking in the Canadian wilderness for a few weeks by myself. To put this in perspective, I was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a 3-hour bus ride away, and I only saw one other person, who was from a distance. He was in a canoe, during the entire 7 days. I brought a few disposable cameras with me, as this was before digital cameras were too widespread. I took a lot of pictures. When I got home, I had them developed and took a look at them. The pictures were standard nature shots, until I got about halfway through my first camera. There were 2 pictures of me asleep in my tent in my sleeping bag. I literally freaked out when I saw it, and I had a complete breakdown. To this day, I have no idea how those pictures got taken. I haven't been camping since, and I sleep with my door open and my curtains shut, and I still get the paranoid feeling that whoever took those pictures is still watching me somehow. Number 1. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, 2 sketchy-looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old-school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling, but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots, and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help, and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about, because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there, which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily all he got from us was a set of new tarps.